Hello everybody, welcome to the next episode of Jan's opening clinic. Without further ado, let's jump right to the questions, because there are many questions still unanswered. Here we go, we'll start with Fieldmaster Sandstad. He's saying, "Hey Jan, love your stuff, especially the opening clinics and your commentary with Peter. Thank you. Your opening series aren't bad either. Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for King's Indian defense players facing two bishop f4 London players?" That's two subsets of players facing each other that I'm not particularly familiar with. Some will answer 2 g6 by 3 knight c3, threatening a transposition to a Peertz. Do you think transposing to the somewhat strange bishop f4 Peertz is something black should be happy with, or does it require work? Cheers, Sandstad. It does require work. That does mean you shouldn't be happy with it, but it's not as silly as it might look at first sight. If it even looks silly at first sight. Not sure about that. So let's put stuff on the board. d4, knight to f6, bishop to f4. I'm not a King's Indian player, so I would very much recommend to go d5 here. Probably even if I was a King's Indian player. But I understand this might not be in everybody's wheelhouse. But I think the position is special enough after 2 bishop f4 that we might give up on our normal ways and switch to this. But I understand that if you're partial to the bishop fianchetto, this is what you want to do. So 2 g6 and knight to c3. Yes, surprisingly, this has become a serious line. Once again, my natural instinct would be to fight for the center here with d5, stopping e4, which, once again, I understand is not in King's Indian players' wheelhouse necessarily. And I also believe that this line, to my surprise, not the only move, but this line with e3 followed by h4 has more bite to it than it looks like. It's still, it's weird to my eyes to put the knight on c3 and then go h4. But very serious players have started doing this more than once, so who am I to argue? Still, if you're asking my preference, it would be 2 d5 and still 3 d5. And after bishop g7, e4, let's say d6, they typically go queen to d2, even though lately people have started even playing knight f3 and then followed up with queen d2. Queen d2 is logical, so you have the option of going bishop to h6, thereby redeeming yourself from this slightly strange positioning of the bishop on f4. But as people have started to pay more attention to this, these lines have developed their own little subset of theory, and it turns out the bishop on f4 is not that terrible and doesn't even have to go to c6 immediately, to h6 immediately. One move I thought was very logical was knight to c6, just keeping an eye on d4, preparing to go e5 as well. And here, what are they doing? You normally get a position like this. Long castle, stops e5, short castles. Now they go knight to f3, bishop to g4. This is what I thought had to be good for black, exploiting the positioning of this bishop. But you switch on the computer here, it will tell you the funny looking move. Well, not that funny. It will tell you the move queen to e3, and it will give white an advantage. So I would expect more discussions to be had in these sort of new branches of theory. But for now, nothing that undermines my belief that we should not give white the center for free. And I would say it certainly does require work, and it probably, or if I was a 2 bishop f4 player, this would be less of an argument for me not to play 2 bishop f4 than the d5 lines. So no, my take is that it requires work. You can start with castles here, of course, and then after long castles play whatever. Move like c6, which I'm sure is not horrible, but it's nothing that, pronounces that bishop f4 is wrong, and this is a great version of the Peertz for black. Therefore, it does seem like this will not stop the Londoners from putting their bishop on the f4 square. Sorry, Sandstad, you gotta do the work. Let's see. Ugh, this looks like a question that requires work from me. Snooks. He's writing a little essay. He's saying, "Hi Jan, I like to play the Slav defense as black against 1 d4. I approve of that. Fights for the center and all that, even though Magnus Carlsen did lose with the Slav defense to Wesley So just yesterday. And not just the Slav defense, but in the exchange Slav. Anyway, I prefer the lines where black gives up the center in order to play bishop f5. For example, d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, dc, a4, bishop f5. However, a lot of white players prevent this line by playing an early e3. I'm quite happy when they start knight f3, e3, bishop f5. But it's more tricky when they start with 3 knight c3. Yep, this is what I've been doing. Most books recommend either playing a6 or e6 against this. But this transposed to lines I don't normally play and I'm not so keen on. I hear ya, most Slav players have that same problem. I wonder what your opinion is of the gambit line d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, and so on. We'll put it on the board in a minute. Or if you have any idea on how I can meet knight c3 and e3 idea that doesn't involve transposing to the a6 or e6 lines. On an entirely unrelated note, I really love the video that you and Paco did explaining the ideas behind the Berlin Wall defense to the Ruy Lopez. I wonder if there's any chance that you could expand it to present a complete black repertoire. That's unlikely, sorry. Snooks, I'm really enjoying using the Chess24 website. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Snooks. We'll do the best we can. Now, the question you're posing is a very typical repertoire question for most pure, quote-unquote, Slav players. I want to play the main lines and not the semi-Slav. And one reason that I have very often played knight to c3, followed by e3 in this position, because it makes it the hardest for Slav players to get their bishop to f5. We'll get to that gambit line that you suggested in a second, but before we do, this move order with 3 knight c3, followed by e3, does have one drawback, which is the move d takes c4 here, which might be something that you want to look into to complete your repertoire. I believe this is somewhat more consistent with Slav players' repertoire than the a6 or e6 lines. Because, yeah, it involves the moves you play in the mainline Slav as well, dc4. Of course, this has its own body of theory, but it's not refuted as far as I know. In my days, we used to look at sharp lines like stuff like this. But black was normally, theoretically, holding his own. And yeah, it leads to a direct play, but I think it's playable. There's also the move for e4 when after b5, a4. The main line used to be, and I think still is, knight b4, knight a2, knight f6, e5, knight d5, bishop takes c4. When, yeah, some people would argue this knight is misplaced. It's a complicated position, but I believe it's playable. There's also some weird lines like a4, a6 that I'm not so sure about. But long story short, d takes c4 might be a move you want to look into. It's quite consistent with the rest of your repertoire, the way I understood. If they go knight f3, you know, you go knight f6, and you're back in business. So that's point number one. Then you're bringing up this, I don't know if this gambit has a name. I'm sure it has a name, but I don't know it. This bishop f5 business gambit, which I've spent some time looking at, mainly from the white perspective. I also read Avrul's book, I believe, where he recommends it for black. He has a repertoire book giving this stuff. I'm not a big fan. I think, well, Avrul's book and other sources will be much more complete than what I'll be saying within the next minute. But I think it's one of those lines where black is bordering on full compensation, but you can probably make a draw with a computer that, yeah, keeps saying 0-30, but keeps having enough play in the position that's not losing. But it's not like fun full compensation, but it's more like hanging around and barely making it. What's the main line? Don't quote me on the move order, but you get these positions, right? Where there's no direct kingside attack, but instead you go rook fc8, and here white has all kinds of options. I think cutting edge might have been this game. What was it? Maybe Melkumyan Rugger in Bundesliga? I think that was it. Oh yeah, I wrote down, yeah, Melkumyan Rugger. Alright, 2012. So I'm sure there's improvements to be found. But these types of positions, I guess you could if you study them carefully, hold them, but I'm not sure I would want to base my repertoire on an IQP position where I'm a pawn down for. Maybe not enough compensation. When I thought about playing this with black, I keep deciding against it. H3, clearly not the only move like this. Whatever, A4, any knight to B5. Many options here that very much should be considered. Knight DB5 and so on and so forth. So I'm not a big fan of that line, but that's more of a subjective opinion. I do not know a refutation. And I think computer-wise, the question was like mathematically, is this a draw or is white winning? It's most likely a draw. However, for the sake of your repertoire, I would rather spend my time looking at d takes c4 than at knight c3, knight f6, e3, bishop f5. I hope that helps. Then, who do we have next? We have yvesm. Where's yvesm at? Here's yvesm. He's saying, hey Jan, do you believe that it is possible to get an advantage with white in the line d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles, knight c3. Sorry, I keep saying knight c3. g3, bishop g7. And so on and so forth. Knight c3, d6, knight 3, knight c6, castles, e5. And how? So if I were to say no, I would not be able to answer the second part of your question, yvesm. I don't know. Once again, we could get into a philosophical discussion. What's an advantage? Blah, blah, bloop. I do believe that practically white has a pleasant enough choice in that position. How do we get there? 1 second, let me find my board. Here's my board. g3 castles, bishop g2, d6, let's say castles, knight to c6, knight to c3, and the move e5. This is a decent line, and it's been played by very strong players like Grishuk, so it's clearly playable. It used to be considered to be better for white because of d5, when they would play knight e7, and then white would go e4, and white would typically be happy arguing. This is a better King's Indian for me than the main line, because my bishop is better on g2, protecting the king side, than it normally is on e2. However, they started playing this move knight to b8 after d5, and somehow the going got a little tougher for white. I'm not sure. I would still say objectively after e4, I guess white is better because he has the space advantage. But you're not going to scare many King's Indian players away from that position after e4. I guess they go e5. And they will have a plan and be reasonably happy playing this. So it's more of a subjective versus objective space advantage thing, which is an argument you could make about the whole King's Indian. There's also other moves here. c5 was once played by Fabian Caruana himself, but I guess this is nothing special for white. Takes. No, this continues, knight c5 and so on. So I think the reason this line is not as popular for black as some of the other lines is that white has the option of going d takes e5. And this is a tricky question. If you ask me, once supercomputers have solved chess, which move will they say is winning and which one is a draw, I would not be one bit surprised if they say d5 is actually winning for white. More space, well, d takes e5 is a draw, even though the most likely is both are a draw. But I think d takes e5 is a move that will be much more unpleasant for your typical King's Indian player. They will be happy with the King's Indian structures after d5, knight b8. Well, d takes e5 makes them try to hold a draw in a somewhat worse, slightly boring position and stuff like this. For example, takes, bishop g5, rook d7, h3, and of course, black with perfect play will hold this, but it won't be much fun. And in practice, white has been winning these positions enough to show they're not like a dead draw. So d takes e5 to make black miserable and stop them from playing this line is probably what I would do more often than not. But if this promises an advantage against a well-prepared black player, I am not sure. There's also this line where they go d takes e5 instead of knight takes e5, bishop g5, bishop e6. And now the funky move is queen to c1, daring them to take this pawn on c4. Well, why is better after knight d2? Of course, instead of bishop takes c4, they can play other moves. Like, what do they normally do? Like queen to some funky square. Did I say funky a lot? Like c8 or b8. The game continues once again with a small white advantage. I would choose these lines because, from my experience, King's Indian players are a lot less happy with these structures where they're under some slight pressure and have very few hopes of getting, attacking chances against the white king than the d5 lines. But objectively, as I said, the aliens might prove that d5 is the one move to rule them all. So, not sure that answers your question definitively. I do not know the truth, but I would lean towards d takes e5, and I would not be particularly unhappy about it. What's that? That's referring to earlier questions. Then we have Csaba. One day I will get the pronunciation of your name exactly right. But I'm guessing that day is not today. He's saying, can you play the Catalan as white without spending months memorizing lines? Wow, strong words, Csaba. I've never spent months memorizing lines on anything. Then again, I haven't played the Catalan much either. So, I believe at your level, you should not, or at any level really, you shouldn't spend months memorizing lines. If you enjoy looking at openings, which I think is a good thing, then yeah, do that. Create your own files, and sometimes you might want to go through them before a game, but to spend months memorizing lines on anything sounds like a horrible usage of your time. So yes, you can play the Catalan without months memorizing lines. And it's a good opening. Then again, I sort of understand where you're coming from, I believe, because the Catalan, well, it's not a real gambit, but there are some lines where they will take your pawn on c4. So I would probably focus on these if you want to ignore most lines but look at some. If so, which are a few sharp lines that I absolutely should memorize? I don't like this word memorize. Can we replace it by look at? All my opponents are under 2000, so they won't really know the stuff either. There you go. So, good old Catalan. Like I said, what would be high on my to-do list if I started the Catalan repertoire? I've played the Catalan, but not so regularly. The two main moves are probably bishop e7 and bishop b4 check, but you can play those with very little knowledge. Wherever bishop b4 check, you go here, you get the pieces out. Bishop g2, castles, whatever they do. c6, you play queen c2, you go rook d1, you go b3, and then you take it from there. You try to prepare e4 and have a look around. That should be doable without a lot of theory. Bishop e7 as well. Play is fairly straightforward, or I don't know, straightforward, but let's say you play the main line. You can also start with queen c2 here if you want to avoid the d takes c4 headaches. But you can even do this, d takes c4, queen c2. You'll get the pawn back. It's probably helpful to know that after a6, a4 is a little more critical than queen takes c4. And then you can start playing here. Take the pawn and try to use your majority in the center. So the lines that, as you say, you should memorize. I would start, looking at lines with d takes c4 because, queen a4 check is not very exciting, even though if, as a safety net, you can always give the check and take the pawn back. But it's more fun and more critical to go bishop g2. And here, I would look at the main moves here. Like a6 is one of the main moves, then after castles. I would want to know, but that's me, and me being a coward. After b5, what do I do? The truth is, I do not know the answer to that question. So that's what I would have to look up and then memorize it. Knight c6 is a main line when, here white goes e3, then queen e2. This is sort of an important line. I don't know why I'm making this a Catalan lecture, but I'll just show the things that I do know. And here, It's important to understand that white is better even though white is a pawn down. Because black really can't do anything. Why white puts his bishop here, controls all the squares. And one day maybe brings the knight around, maybe goes for e4, maybe goes for knight c3 and e4. It's just a horrible position for black. So before I start giving my expert opinions on all the lines, these are the ones I would focus on. Knight to c6 is also a move I would want to know something about. Then castles, rook b8 is not so bad for black. So probably queen a4. And I guess here bishop b4 check is a line. Basically, the lines around d takes c4, if you want to play with bishop g2. There's also c5 here, where it's good to have an idea. What do you want to do after castles, knight c6? You have a choice. dc5, knight e5. Is that the choice? Queen a4. So those are the lines that I would start with building my repertoire. But it might also be a character thing that, ooh, I'm a pawn down. I really want to know how I get it back. And I will not rest until I do know. As for, yeah, obviously Catalan, one of the main openings out there. It is sound. I would still lean, but as usual, talking personal preferences here, more towards for knight to c3, even when it comes to without any theory. Because, yeah, to my mind it's always, nah. I'm not going to say more natural. Yeah, I'm more used to playing setups with knight to c3 and then trying to develop my pieces in the center. But that's not an objective evaluation. Catalan is fine. I would focus on d takes c4 lines. And yeah, don't be so afraid of having to memorize stuff. Look at stuff. It's fun. Openings are fun. Or, I don't know. Can I spread that message? I'm not sure. Fun, fun, fun is the message that I should be spreading. My face really doesn't know. Knight 90, another FIDE master. He's asking the eternal question. Come on, you're too strong for that question. He's saying, hi Jan, what opening do you recommend as black to get rich play with many chances to win? Generally I play Nimzo. Thanks a lot for your great series for chess24. There you go, that's the opening I'm recommending. And I feel good in resulting positions, but if my opponent is unambitious and wants to draw, it's hard to create something. Formerly I played Chigorin's defense, but sometimes my positions were dubious and I had to fight for equalizing for a long time. Thanks in advance for your advices. Yeah, there is no answer to that question, as I'm sure you know, Knight 90. It's always a trade-off. You can play an opening like the King's Indian, like the Benoni, like, what else comes to mind? The Benko Gambit, where maybe the position, on average, might be a little sharper, but maybe you will be equal a little less on average. If you're talking, whatever, computer evaluation after move 50. Not that that matters. But that is the eternal trade-off. You can play the Grünfeld, very forcing line. I hear Peter Swidler did a good video series on it. You can play the lines that I recommended based on the Nimzo and the Vienna and facing the Catalan. You can play the Slav. But if you will play theory-heavy main lines, it will happen to you more often than not that there are ways where white can equalize. I normally argue that in practice, if you move around a little, it is less of a problem than people think it is. But yeah, somehow it's a very deep-rooted fear in all of us. Arguably a deeper fear than, ooh, I might not equalize. That I'll play a weaker opponent and he's gonna equalize with the white pieces against me and make a draw. What can I do against it? I don't have an answer. I'm not the type, and there are types who do that will just play d4, g6 whenever they have 200 extra rating points and wing it, which might be mathematically a profitable strategy in many cases, but I'm not comfortable playing with less space and with what I perceive as a worse position. So I do not have the magic opening. The Chigorin is not a terrible opening, but yeah, it's probably not equalizing, as you know as well. Therefore, everything I could tell you, you already know. I goof around, I sometimes, whatever. I played this last tournament, just trying to get a fresh position. And then you change it up, then next game you play this maybe. But it's more about being flexible, adjusting to the opponent for me than saying, the Nimzo is my solid repertoire, and the Albin's counter gambit is my risky repertoire. Don't do it like that. So yeah, sorry. This is an eternal question that in this or similar forms we've seen many times. I don't have an answer to. I would like a sound, solid opening against 1d4 that will give me risk-free winning chances. That does not exist. Or no one's told me, at least. Anyway, best of luck. Knight 90. The Lazy Brother is saying, "Hi Jan, what is your opinion of Scheveningen Sicilian? Ooh. E4, C5, Knight f3, E6, D4, CD4, Knight D4, Knight F6, Knight C3, D6. I kind of like the idea of not spending a tempo on A6 in the Najdorf, and use it for timely E5 or D5 trust in the center. No, I don't like that idea. Is Kara's attack 6G4 really so dangerous to put someone off the opening altogether? Yes. Is H6 the only viable move against it? I don't know, but I believe so. I looked at E5, but resulting positions are rather sad. Or should I just abandon it, take the bull by the horns, and play the Najdorf move order instead? Thanks. I believe you should do that, the Lazy Brother. The thing is, if you compare some of the Najdorf lines to the direct Scheveningen lines, the Scheveningen just does not compare favorably. And also, if you look at the scores, after Knight F6, Knight C3, E6, G4, White just scores fairly massively, like above 60%, which doesn't mean G4 is winning, but it's still much better than what you normally get in the Najdorfs. And A6 is not a loss of a tempo. A6 is a tremendously useful move in all the Sicilians, controlling the B5 square, preparing B5, and so on and so forth. But the big thing is, if you look at Najdorf lines, let's say A6, one of the very main lines nowadays is H3. And if black goes E6, white goes G4. And here, I believe one can argue, and probably win that argument, that A6 is more useful than H3, while in comparison, in the Scheveningen, you start with E6, white goes G4. Yeah, H6 is the best move. Here, white has a broad choice. G5 is a move. But H4 seems to be a problem as well, when I guess there's some theory that is in line with the idea you like Knight C6, Rook G1, D5. But even these lines, I'm not that convinced black equalize here. How does this go? Bishop E3, Bishop D7, and where? C3. Or Bishop G2, followed by C3. Even those are normally a fight for survival. So I do think that the Scheveningen is giving up a little too much, because, yeah, as mentioned, in the Najdorf, it's all these lines where white is hoping to get in a worse version of G4. Rook G1 is a move here. H4 is a move here. And so on and so forth. Therefore, it does seem that people have more or less abandoned the Scheveningen, and nowadays, when you see it, you normally see it via some slightly different move orders. I think this is more of a thing, no? Takes, Knight C6, Knight C3, D6. And even in this position, people do play G4, but there's no knight to push around. I can't really claim a lot of expertise. I haven't played the Scheveningen since I was like 12, 13 years old, and I've never played one E4 with white. But just comparing it to Najdorf positions and switching your computer on in the positions after, in the other move order, G4, I believe will turn most people off the Scheveningen. It's not hopeless, but it does seem like you're making your task a lot harder, and I would just start playing the Najdorf, where additionally it will be better for chess culture, because you not only get to learn the Scheveningen structures after Bishop E2, E6, but you can also many times play lines with E5, giving you a different look and broaden your chess horizons. So, sorry, the Lazy Brother. I understand not the answer you wanted, but my honest opinion. My uninformed but honest opinion. Otofon is saying, "Hi Jan, can you please explain why we cannot see more often 1 E4, C5, Knight F3, Knight C6 Sicilian on a top level. Only 2 e6, d6 is there nowadays. Is that true? Is there any particular line after 3 bishop b5 and 4-5 bishop takes c6, which makes black's life rather tough? Why do you think some formerly popular lines like Sveshnikov become suddenly obsolete without any obvious reason? I think you're exaggerating a little bit. There's still people like Boris Gelfand comes to mind that do play 1 e4, c5, knight f3, knight to c6 as their main repertoire. But I do agree. First of all, at top level, e4, e5 is slightly more popular than c5. And if we see c5, it's mainly the knight off, which I'm not sure it's because the Pelikan or the Sveshnikov is bad. But the problem with this move order is that you give white a lot of options. Let's say your repertoire is the Pelikan, which, for example, was Gelfand's repertoire for his match against Vishyanen. So you have to be ready for all these lines after bishop g5, which is doable, but it's a lot of work. And then you have to be ready for 3 knight c3, which is, yeah, probably not a move that gives you sleepless nights. But if you go knight f6, then bishop b5, people will argue it's a decent version of bishop b5 lines. So often you need to have a backup repertoire here, or you need to be able to play a different scheme here, be it e5, leading to a very different position, or g6, transposing to, what do we call this, the accelerated dragon, I think it's called. So it's more work. And then there's 3 bishop b5, which, as you pointed out, might nowadays be almost as big a headache as 3 d4, and maybe even more popular. I'm not sure if there's anything wrong with it. Once again, I can't claim to be heavily into the details. But Gelfand, probably the leading expert nowadays, he's had literally tens of games in this now trendy line. g6, they take on c6. dc has been well established over the years. dc is playable, but this seems to be like a slightly favorable version for white of these anti-Berlin structures, if that makes sense. With e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6. Let's say d3, bishop c5, bishop c6, dc. Because here these pawns are slightly clumsy in the Berlin normally. This pawn is still here, which might be better. So dc, playable, but the current discussions revolve as much, if not more, around this. And yeah, I don't think this has been refuted. Gelfand normally makes draws here. Knight to h6 is the point. c3, short castles. And their idea is if white goes d4, which white typically doesn't do, you want to take on d5, which seems to be fine. So you get these weird positions. Like, how does this go? h3, f5, e5, knight f7. Stuff like this. Which, yeah, not refuted, but also not everybody's cup of tea. Therefore, yeah, well, I'm not sure I agree with your theory that we don't see knight c6 at all anymore. I believe it's more of a workload slash how much do we like the trendy positions in the lines that are currently fashionable. Do I really want to maintain a Pelikan repertoire and a bishop b5 g6 repertoire and a 3 knight c3 repertoire? Or is it better for me to play the Berlin or the Marshall? And if I play the Sicilian, to play d6, where of course I also have to deal with bishop b5 check, but at least there's no structural damage there. Therefore, might be slightly more popular. I can't really say, but I would not advise anybody, especially if you're aware of all these lines and you're saying, I'm cool with them, to not play 2 knights c6. And sometimes also an advantage if you're playing a line that's not that trendy at top level chess, but used to be, is a bit forgotten. If there's nothing obviously wrong with it, and I agree with you, there's no obvious reason why not to play it, look at Gelfand's games, then it can be a good idea to, go slightly against the current trend, and you might have an advantage in knowledge. So, yeah, interesting question there by Otofon. Short answer, 3 bishop b5, more annoying against knight c6 than against d6. Yeah, does not exact after e6. FarAwayFromHell. Oh yeah, this I've looked at. He is asking about a very specific line in the King's Indian defense. We'll put it on the board in a minute. I guess black can equalize. Spoiler alert, I'd be surprised if black can only equalize in that line. I'll put it on the board if I manage to do so. But it did not strike me as the way to punish the King's Indian. Still, it's a very interesting idea, and shout out, oh no, not bishop e3, that's my Gligorish stuff, and shout out for FarAwayFromHell for looking for ways to punish the good old King's Indian. It just felt to me in this. I'm putting the very long line he mentioned on the board. All of this stuff still normal, right? Knight f6, and now in this position I think they typically don't sacrifice, but they go back to d3, and I have no idea what's going on. But FarAwayFromHell wants to break through very directly. BA, and here still they normally go back, no knight d3 or knight to c2, preparing c5. But the line mention was a5, b takes a, c5. And just without getting into too many lines, normally this just seems to be too high a price to pay to open some files. On the queen side, typically we want to eat the black queen side and be a rook up in such a position. While here we're arguably material down and we gave 2 minor pieces, and black still has all of his attackers, including this powerful bishop on c8, the knights and so on and so forth, in play. So I'd be very, very surprised, dumbfounded, if white could hope for an advantage here. Maybe you can equalize, but it does look like it's too much to me. There were some lines that FarAwayFromHell was giving. Queen to c2, g4, f takes g4, knight takes e4, queen e4, bishop to f5. Which, I'm not sure, this seems like a fairly drastic measure, giving the material back with knight e4 and bishop f5. This might equalize, but not sure black needs to do that. If black, for example, plays queen to e8 here, I have such a hard time believing in white's chances. If queen takes c3, g4, and I just have a feeling the black attack will be faster here with all the typical stuff, g3 takes, knight h5, pieces coming over. I have to admit I did not spend hours on studying this position, and maybe, but I'd be very, very surprised. You can prove me wrong here, but I have a feeling this is not the direction. To give 2 minor pieces for the rook is just too much, and the black attack will be too strong in all these lines, apart from the fact that, as you mentioned, there are ways for black to force the issue with g4, fg. My computer also gives c6 here, for example, and so on and so forth. So I don't believe in that line, FarAwayFromHell, but I do commend your spirit of trying to find forcing way against the King's Indian to punish them. But yeah, he's asking, do you think this whole idea with 18c5 is worth analyzing and trying, or is it just a line for one game? I honestly think it's not even a line for one game, because if you surprise your opponent with it, what's the upside? What are we hoping for? If he continues to, play King's Indianish move, queen e8 or h5, g4, are we better anywhere? I can't really picture it. So, not a fan. Sorry, FarAwayFromHell. I keep clicking on the wrong thing. Why do I do that? Here we are. Sorry. KingWang is saying, hi Jan, I'm looking for a dodgy sideline to play against 1e4 for those days when the e5 main lines are just not enough fun. I hear ya. I would like something with real shock value, like the North Sea defense. I don't know what that is. The Elephant Gambit. That sounds like sounds a bit harsh to me to go from e4, e5 main lines to the Elephant Gambit, because then you might as well just resign, no? Or the 2 knight g8 Alekhine. Bonus points if it isn't obviously refuted. Any ideas? So, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Elephant Gambit is e4, f5, ef, king f7? Like, how much more refuted could a position be? Or an opening? That sounds a bit much, but I think the line you're looking for is the good old Colorado. Like German. Apologies if he's a GM by now. Ilya Schneider used to play a lot. You go 1 knight c6. Most white players, lazy as they are, will play 2 knight f3, expecting to transpose to mainline theory after e5. But now you strike with the devious move to f5. White takes, you go d5. And the good news is, it's not as terrible as it looks. Like, I'm sure white is somewhat better after d4, bishop f5, bishop d3, or bishop to b5. But it's not obviously refuted. There's some fun lines like knight h4. I guess the boring computer gives knight h6, but you can also, do stuff like this. Which is still 1,000 times better than your other suggestions. And it does look fun, does it not? I think it looks pretty fun. So that's my recommendation for you. Study Ilya Schneider games here and play the Colorado. If they go to d4, then f5 is a bit much. But here I'm sure you can go d5 and you'll have enough fun to make it worth your while. Knight c3, you can, I don't know, look at e5 here, or you can take. These lines are, I believe, still a fair compromise between shock value and not as horrible as your other suggestions. So I hope you and the Colorado will become long-term friends, KingWang. Here's some suggestion. FarAwayFromHell is saying, what about the Brussels gambit? e4, c5, knight f3, f5. Yeah, but that's much worse than knight c6, knight f3, f5. Nah, don't do that. We have a question by Sankat Chakravarti, but I had the exact same question by Niels Rowe earlier in this current iteration of the opening clinic. So I would advise Sankat to check out my answer there. I believe it was in opening clinic 19.1, but with a new system where we give timestamps and the questions. I'm sure he can find it very, very easily. So, long story short, 97, not a fan. I think white is better. DjedMoros is asking, hey Mr. Gustafsson, I'm new at chess. Hope you like it. I looked at some systems against d4 and like the Slav semi-Slav a lot. My question is, with which line I start study in the main lines? The a6, Maran, or dc? Gotcha. The answer, I guess, is good old it depends, but I won't cop out. So the main lines start in this position. I would not advise you to play a6 here if you're new to chess. That's a bit too cryptic, and also, yeah, the positions are a little weird and slow and strategic after c5 or even after e3. I would not want to start with this. e6, the semi-Slav, is a bit more manageable, but some of the lines are still very confusing, like bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, dc, e4, g5, and so on. So if you enjoy stuff like that, if you enjoy sharpish positions, the semi-Slav is not a bad choice. But white also has the option, of course, of going for the Maran or the anti-Maran. In practice, more often than not, you get e3, knight b7, queen c2, bishop d6, bishop d3. It's not that exciting, frankly, like this, whatever. You go b5. I don't know, it's also not the easiest set of positions if you're starting out. So my recommendation would be start playing the Slav, the good old mainline Slav. If you don't like it, you can then promote to other things. The problem with the mainline Slav, like from a teaching perspective, is you give up one stronghold in the center, which is, of course, not ideal. But there is something you gain for it. White typically plays a4 to stop b5. And here, well, e6 we talked about in an earlier iteration. It's full-fledged mainline as well. But after bishop to f5, I believe these positions, they are not so hard to handle. Most of your opponents will play e3, e6, bishop c4. You go bishop to b4, then you castle, then you put the knight on d7. And then the discussion starts. Will white manage to get an e4? Will he have to weaken his position for it? How does black react? It's very useful to have this b4 square as a stronghold for the bishop. So I think these positions are a good hunting ground for you starting out, and I will recommend those. You also need to know a little something, or, well, if you want to start studying opening theory, about knight to e5, when there are the choices of going e6 or knight bd7. Knight bd7 are some fun, reasonably sharp lines with queen c7. If you want to go for this, g3, e5, this is very direct stuff that, yeah, I think is quite playable. And if you want a more mellow game, you can play knight to b6, knight e5, a5, which is also playable with similar themes like black occupies the b4 square, white tries to occupy the center. So I believe that d takes c4 will give you the most defined structures and still positions that are rich enough to keep improving from there to get started. But if you played to e6, I would not question your choice either. a6 I would wait with, or, well, I would never touch it, but I would wait with until you have some experience in other Slav structures before you decide to dabble in that territory. Thanks for the question, DjedMoros. What else do we have? Fravatel is saying, Grüß dich, der Jan. Thanks for crushing me in bullet the other day. You're very welcome. My lazy question concerns a recommendation by Avruch in his latest d4 book, which Korobov used to defeat Aryantari in Vaik an See 2018. I just checked, there is literally one game with this position, so it hasn't really caught fire just yet. Avruch gives this interesting line against the Grünfeld, one of my main openings for black, resulting in this position. Tari played the inferior bishop takes h3. Yeah, keep the bishop. Avruch gives bishop h5, knight f4, e6 as his main line and stops here. As I'm not as experienced with spacebar hitting as you, I was wondering what you would recommend for black in this position. Above all, where to put the pieces and why. Spacebar never tells you why. That's my problem. That's why I'm always allergic to plans and the why question. I don't know. Or should I just go for the King's Indian defense against 3g3, since these positions are too static for the average Grünfeld player? Alright, so two things. One, let me try to reconstruct that position. G6, G3, C6, here, here. This is how you get there, right? Highly specific stuff. Queen A4, knight FD7. Maxime recently played bishop G7, CD castles here, didn't he? I hope I'm not mixing this up. But this might be less static. If you want something sharper. So knight FD7, CD, knight B6, queen D1, CD, knight C3, knight C6, E3, bishop F5, knight H3. Yeah. I can tell you what my spacebar says. My spacebar says H5 is a move, and it says bishop H6 is a decent move, which, yeah, would be maybe one reason for me to prefer knight E2 and not knight to H3. Because here, yeah, if I have to go G4, I won't be too happy a camper. And after knight to F4, it looks like taking on F4. Seems to be alright. So yeah, that would not fill my heart with the greatest of joy. Bishop H6 could be a move. And after H5, knight F4, E6, H3. Yeah, my compy was saying bishop B4 or bishop D6 are both okay. I'd feel slightly uneasy with black here about this bishop on F5. But my happiness level from the white side of the board is also questionable, so I think I wouldn't mind this position with black, frankly. I guess not exactly what you were looking for. But once again, is this really a plan's position? It's more about, does G4 work here? I guess it doesn't, because some queen H4 business, no? And if G4 doesn't work, What are we so afraid of? So I'm not particularly worried about this particular... Did I say particular a lot? Not particularly. About this bishop f5 knight h3 position, which I saw for the first time 15 minutes ago. That's not true. I read your question when we did the opening clinic originally. Weeks and weeks ago. But yeah, I haven't studied this much, and it looks like it has not found a lot of followers, because there's only this one game. But for the second part of your question, I'm always a little confused. First of all, yeah, I mentioned against this queen a4, which most people won't play. Bishop g7 does lead to more direct play. I'm always confused since you asked, should I play the King's Indian because this is not dynamic enough? Why do people not play this stuff anymore? I've asked Svedler, he said he's never fully trusted it, which is fair enough. But I've also never fully refuted it. And I've seen what Avruch gave here in, what's the main line, rook e8. He had some knight h4, I believe. But there, I think, with spacebar pushing, or even just following some of the lines that Avruch gave, Black can probably get a position. He won't mind. And I've never been, I've been a bit surprised that they don't seem to be doing this line, which for a Grünfeld player seems to be the closest thing to home, no? The King's Indian move order gives white a lot of freedom as well, and it's not really your wheelhouse. Well, the c6, as you mentioned, followed by d5 structures. If, let's say this. Let's say c6, bishop g2, d5. I understand if you're saying, I'm a Grünfeld player, this is too static for me. So, it's more of a question, because I'm not really that familiar with all the subtleties here, but I'm not aware of a refutation, like these e4, knight b6 systems. I always thought that black is probably okay. Like, how does this go? You go for some c5, d5, e6 business, no? And the other line I just put on the board. I also don't know what white is up to these days. Therefore, that's something I would take into consideration as well. Hope that helps, fravatel. Alright, last question for this show, which I believe will be the penultimate. Then we have some more questions for the last installment of number 19. And we'll open a new one. Is by Yaper10. He's saying, hello Jan, thanks for doing this show again. It's always a great pleasure to watch. Thank you. My question is about the 8a4 followed up with 9d4 anti-Marshall line. It seems to me that the top players are choosing 10 knight takes e5 more often than 10d takes e5. Still playable? Yes, as far as I know, both moves are equally playable. I guess the latest game in this particular line was Caruana-Matlakov in Vike 2018. We'll put it on the board in a minute. Yeah, pretend bishop e3, bishop d4, and he's saying, my question is twofold. I hope you can answer them both. Yeah, it's the same topic. I would like to hear your point of view about the line. Is 8a4 still playable if you're trying to get a slight advantage with white out of the opening? If not, what alternative do you recommend? Is 14 queen d3 an interesting try to improve over the Caruana-Matlakov game? We'll get to that in a second. So I guess, let's look at a chessboard to answer both questions. Sorry, not this position. Knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, short castles. First of all, the question was, what should white do looking for a small advantage? And I agree, or I would say that nowadays, if you want to be a Ruy Lopez mainline player, 8a4 is the most critical try. The alternative being, instead of rook e1, to play 6d3. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at the highest level, more often than not, if people go here, you either see 6d3 or in castles. Well, sometimes I check the c3, d5 endgames in the Marshall they nowadays play. But if white is playing for a win, more often than not, they go 8a4. After b4, which is the main line, bishop b7 is a little less popular. I would say that the current discussions centers a little more around a5 and then these d6, d3 lines, bishop e6, bishop takes, as for example Wesley So played against Levon Aronian in the candidates, was it? Yeah, in the candidates. I would say that's currently a little more discussed than the line you're mentioning with a4, b4, d4. So if you're looking for an alternative, that seems like a very natural starting point. And then after d4, d6, de, as you mentioned, yeah, I'm not aware if there's anything wrong with d takes e5. There were all these games, Kayakin against Svidler, for example, a while ago, that I think are still fairly playable for black. But I do agree, and I have very much noticed that people have started playing knight takes e5 a lot instead of d takes e5. After knight takes e5, yeah. There is knight bd2. This was normally the main argument against it when I recently played knight ft7, which is a little shady. There's also a5 as a move here, which has become trendy. So these lines seem to be playable. And now, with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to the line you mentioned. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, queen to e2, bishop to c5. a5, I guess, is still very much a move here as well. But bishop c5, bishop e3, bishop to d4. I'm also not sure if white has an advantage in this neck of the woods. But, you know, playable, I guess. Knight d2, knight h5, how does this go? This sort of stuff. Don't quote me on the move order. But yeah, I'm not sure if this is better for white. There was some game, Dominguez against... I forgot who it was against, my apologies. Lisiege, maybe? Could be wrong. Anyway, this, yeah, seemed close to equalizing to me as well, but this bishop d4 that was played in the game mentioned does seem like a clever computerish solution. And here you suggested queen to d3 as an improvement, when I have nothing much more to add than what my computer is spitting out, which is bishop takes b2, if you don't want to transpose to the line I just gave, with bishop e3, queen e3, knight g4, and so on. And yeah, it seems like bishop b2 is equalizing, but as a one-game try, this does seem very much playable for white. How did this go? Here I have to find knight to d5. No, this was the trick. In order to have queen takes b2, knight takes e3. And Compy said the good move is rook to a2, bishop back to d4, e d5, queen d6. The line continues a bit, but in the end it was some drawish endgame. c3 takes. Well, space barring. And the computer was making a comfortable draw. So theoretically, queen d3. It's not going to win you any correspondence games. As a one-game try in a practical game, not against it at all. And yeah, as mentioned, I believe that the a5, d3 lines might be putting a little more pressure on black than the a4, b4, d4 lines. However, this is a solid line where white risks very little. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it either. Just yet, against the computer, it will be very hard to find an edge in positions like the one we just discussed. That's it for today. Thanks everybody for asking questions. I hope you enjoyed it. I have no wise closing words. Let's enjoy Game 4 of the NBA Finals. Let's enjoy the Football World Championship. Or not. See you guys next time.